Hi, I'm Becky McGinnis, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Lathrop & Gage LP in Kansas City, Missouri. I've had the privilege of providing services for the Diocese of Kansas City St. Joseph for several years in the labor and employment area, and enjoy working with everyone and doing presentations on an as-needed basis for our employees. I also do the annual new employee orientation session on sexual harassment. And we are doing this tape today to provide you an annual basis for which you can renew and refresh yourself on the issues regarding harassment awareness in doing this employment training. You may be wondering why we're talking about it in this circumstance. If you attended the initial employment training, we explained those there, and there are 3 reasons why we do this particular type of training. The main reason we do this training is that because harassment on the basis of any protected category, and we will talk about what those categories are, basically say race, sex, age, national origin, disability, it can even be religion, pregnancy. Any of that type of harassment is against our Catholic Christian principles and has no place here at the diocese. The second reason that we need to talk about harassment awareness training is because it creates a negative impact in the workforce. It creates an environment that's not comfortable for you to work in. No one wants to come to work if they feel like they're being harassed because of their race or age or sex. And it would eventually affect the ability for you to do your job. It's distracting, and it's hard for people to concentrate when they feel like they are being harassed because of a particular status that they may have. And the third reason that we do this harassment training is because harassment can actually rise to the level of being legally actionable. It's against the law to the extent that it is done based on a person's protected status. While we talk about the harassment based on any of the protected statuses, there are the different types of discrimination and harassment. And discrimination and harassment are a little different. Discrimination has to do if choices are made in the terms and conditions of your employment based on your protected status, those that we just discussed, whether it be race, age, national origin, sex, disability, those protected statuses, if those come into play in making determinations for performance evaluations, promotions, salary increases, those types of term and condition decisions, those are considered discrimination. Harassment is generally done by one individual against another. You could view it as kind of picking on someone because of their particular protected status. Discrimination and harassment are prohibited by the diocese of any kind, any discrimination or harassment on the protected statuses. And just to give you a full view of what those protected statuses are, we have them set out here. You will see race, color, national origin, religion, sex, pregnancy, disability or handicap, age, and I should not have had to peek for that one because I'm fully protected because of my age, and veteran status. Each of those is considered a federal protected status. There are also other protected statuses covered by state and local ordinance. For instance, in Kansas City, there is a local ordinance that prevents discrimination and harassment for sexual orientation. Currently, there is no sexual orientation prohibition under federal or state law. If you look at the different categories we have on this slide, you'll notice race and then color. And it has been determined that even different shades of a nationality can lead to discrimination. In other words, if people are of a Middle Eastern nationality, but some are darker skinned than others, sometimes the darker skinned individuals are treated differently than the lighter skinned individuals. So color is kind of a subset of race. You'll also see pregnancy on this slide. Pregnancy is also a subset of the sex. You can have sex discrimination, but you can also have specifically pregnancy discrimination. If someone wants to treat someone differently in the workplace because they are pregnant and say, well, you can't take this time off, you're wasting too much time, and it's because the person is pregnant or has morning sickness, that can potentially be a pregnancy discrimination problem. While we talk about the different types of protected statuses, the main focus that we are directed to by the EEOC guidelines is sex harassment. Sex harassment has been the most prevalent type of harassment which the EEOC investigates, the EEOC being the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And they will investigate all kinds of protected status discrimination and harassment, but specifically their largest file would have to be related to sexual harassment. So the training that we do is mainly directed to sexual harassment, but it applies equally to all of the other protected statuses. There are two types of sexual harassment. There is what's known as quid pro quo sex harassment. And this is typically what I call the old style sexual harassment. This is someone who harasses an individual in exchange for sexual favors. In other words, if you'll go out with me, I will give you a promotion. If you will become romantically involved with me, I'll make sure that you get a significant salary raise. Or I can impact your terms and conditions of employment, so you have to acquiesce to my social demands in order to get ahead in the company where you're working or in the diocese if someone says that to you. I don't see as much quid pro quo sexual harassment anymore. It seems like people have gotten the idea that that's inappropriate. Everyone knows that's inappropriate. It's not done. The type of sexual harassment that I tend to see more often in my line of work as a labor and employment attorney is what's known as the hostile environment sex harassment. And a hostile environment sex harassment is harassment that interferes with an individual's ability to do their work. It creates an intimidating, a hostile environment. It's someone who keeps, for instance, hitting on someone when they're not interested. They don't want any involvement with the person, but the person keeps it up. And that type of sexual harassment is also actionable under Title VII and also under the Missouri Human Rights Act. There are several prohibited behaviors that come along the guise of sexual harassment. For instance, unwelcome sexual innuendos or suggestive comments, unwanted compliments. I've had situations where an individual has gone overboard to compliment someone on their dress, on their hair, on their appearance, and it gets to the point where it's so overbearing that it starts making the person feel uncomfortable. If the individual tells them, I really appreciate it, thank you for the compliments, but it makes me uncomfortable, and the person continues, they're potentially creating a sexually hostile environment for that individual. Another is certainly unwelcome comments about a person's body or anatomy. I recommend that you never make comments or jokes about someone's body parts. That's always inappropriate. And clearly insults or slurs. You've all heard racial slurs, insults to individuals who may have disabilities. There's currently a case filed in Jackson County, Kansas City, that the co-workers were referring to the individual as Forrest Gump. And some people may think that's funny, but the individual to whom it's directed may not share in their amusement, and it can be particularly intimidating and interfere with the ability to do their work if they're always feeling like they're being belittled or demeaned based on their protected status. Other prohibited behavior, which can potentially create a sexually hostile environment, includes staring or sexually suggestive and offensive gestures. You may wonder about the staring, and I've actually had a situation where that came up under the guise of, well, he looked at me. And when you say, well, I understand looking at you. For instance, through this camera, I'm looking at you. And that's probably, and I hope, not making you feel uncomfortable. But there are situations where an individual is being looked at, say if the person is staring at an individual's chest, not making eye contact, or scanning the individual, looking that individual up and down. That can be offensive. That can potentially be sexually harassing. Unwanted cards and gifts. If you are showering someone with cards and gifts to get their attention, and they tell you that they appreciate it, but please don't do that, it makes them feel uncomfortable, or they feel obligated to reciprocate, or they don't want the attention directed to them, and the coworker keeps it up, that potentially can create a sexually hostile environment if it's being done because of the person's sex. Again, unwanted invitations for lunch or dinner. Clearly, if you invite someone to go out to lunch or dinner and the individual says no, have you engaged in sexual harassment if that individual is of an opposite sex? No. However, if that person says no and declines and doesn't say they would like to do it at another time, and you keep inviting that person out for lunch and dinner, will you go out with me? Will you go to the movie? Will you go to dinner? You again are creating a potentially sexually harassing environment. Unwelcome personal attention. This can come in such benign activity as hanging around the individual's work cubicle, standing over their shoulder, just visiting with them on a regular basis and taking too much time. They're trying to get their work done and this person's trying to get their attention. Again, if this is done because of a sexual reason, opposite sex or same sex in the case of potentially sexual orientation in Kansas City, again, that can create a sexually hostile work environment for that individual. And clearly, unwanted and inappropriate touching. Inappropriate touchings, I think, probably are more understandable than unwelcome touchings. Inappropriate touchings would clearly involve touchings of personal body parts that people would understand, breasts, buttocks, those types of body parts. However, you could also engage in inappropriate touching to the extent that the person doesn't want the touching. Some people like to give hugs. Some people don't like to be hugged. So you really need to be careful, because if you hug a person who is not comfortable with hugging, and it happens to be a person of the opposite sex, if it gets to the point where it continues and the person may or may not have said they didn't want to be hugged, then it can again create a sexually hostile work environment. And when it gets to my desk, in some instances, it's no longer a hug but a grope. So you want to make sure you do not engage in any unwanted and inappropriate touching. I recommend that if you are going to have physical contact with people, that you keep it to a handshake, just a high five, because I've even seen where pats on the back may be interpreted or later described as not a pat on the back but lower on the body, and that again can cause problems if the touching is unwanted. Other prohibited behavior that can potentially create a sexually hostile work environment would clearly be not only the requests for dinner or lunch, but propositions. Those are clearly inappropriate, unwanted propositions, and clearly requests for dates. Generally, if you tell a person no, you don't want to go out with them, they get the clue. However, there are some people that potentially could just keep asking, and in that situation, the individual could be again creating a sexually hostile work environment for their coworker. And clearly, cartoons, emails, comments that have anything to do with the protected statuses to the extent that they're unwanted are prohibitive behaviors and can rise to the level of a hostile work environment. Just to give you an example of how people perceive those, I'm personnel partner for our firm, and I am in charge of kind of monitoring or taking reports on instances where people feel that inappropriate conduct has been engaged. And I came off of the elevator one morning and had a coworker come to me and say, "Have you seen the pictures in the women's restroom?" Well, I hadn't been there yet, but I went in, and on the mirror in the women's restroom was a picture of the old Psycho shower scene where the woman is looking over her shoulder with the shocked expression on her face. And you can clearly tell that she's undressed, but it only goes down to the lower back. The caption on the bottom of the Psycho scene said, "Shocking, it's someone's 40th birthday." Well, the individual who put that in there thought it was funny, and the individual whose birthday had the 40th birthday, they also thought it was funny. But clearly, the individual who came to me and reported it did not think it was funny and found it offensive. And she not only found it offensive, but when you put something like that in a public work area, you have other people coming in that may be using your restroom, such as clients or people who come to visit your guests here at the diocese, and family members. And is this something that you would like for them to see if they need to use your facilities? Probably not. Now, you will notice on these that a lot of these all started with unwanted. And what does unwanted mean? Who determines what's unwanted? Well, unwanted is determined by the reasonable person standard. Would a reasonable person under the circumstances find that that particular conduct was unwanted? And who's the reasonable person in our circumstances if it rises to the level of a violation of Title VII or the Missouri Human Rights Act? It's your jury, the jury of your peers, that will determine whether or not the conduct was so bad that it created a sexually hostile work environment. There are also prohibited behaviors that are, in general, hostility to persons of one gender or another, whether same-sex or not, and not necessarily motivated by desire. It can just be as simple as a male aversion to females, a female aversion to males, and just treating them in a rude and demeaning manner. Just in general, not directed to any particular person, but directed to their gender. There's also a general hostility to any person based on the other protected statuses. In other words, a general hostility toward Middle Easterners, a general hostility toward Asians, a general hostility toward older individuals or individuals with disabilities. All of those are also prohibited behavior and can potentially rise to the level of a hostile work environment based on their protected status. These behaviors that we have just discussed are prohibited even if the individual did not intend them to be harassing. In other words, I've had people come to me and say, "I didn't intend to offend the person. I was joking. I didn't mean anything by it. I was treating it lightly. It wasn't that I have a bias or a prejudice toward that individual because of their protected status." Still, those behaviors are prohibited. The behaviors are also prohibited even if they are welcome to some participants. For instance, if you and I enjoy telling off-color jokes to each other, and we are sitting in at a table in the diocese office area, and someone is sitting next to us who does not like off-color jokes, and we know that individual does not like off-color jokes, yet we continue to tell off-color jokes in their presence, we, again, are creating a potentially hostile work environment for that individual, even though the two of us find those unwelcome. So you need to be aware of the folks around you. You need to be aware of who you're interacting with and avoid engaging in the prohibitive behaviors that can cause any problems with your coworkers. These behaviors are also prohibited even if they take place off-duty, in other words, not during working hours, and also off-premises. In other words, say you leave the diocese and there's a group of you that wants to go for a happy hour and just have a few drinks. When you're with your coworkers, again, you are still prohibited from engaging in the activities that we discussed. In other words, if someone is sexually harassing someone or harassing them because of a protected status, if they're doing it at a bar with their coworkers, again, that's prohibited, and again can lead to legally actionable claims for a hostile work environment. Also, these prohibited behaviors are not just targeted between two individuals or coworkers. In other words, they're prohibited no matter who engages in them, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's a teacher, a parent, a student, or a coworker. To the extent that any of these individuals are harassing or engaging in prohibited conduct toward another individual, whether it be a teacher, a supervisor, a parent, a student, or a coworker, it is prohibited. And again, it can be legally actionable. The types of conduct that we are discussing here today are absolutely prohibited. There's no place for that type of conduct here at the diocese under any circumstances. And if anyone tells you that it's permissible, that you do not have to accept it. If someone tells you, you will go along with me on this, or I will make sure that you lose your job, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Report it immediately. And you can report it to your direct supervisor if your direct supervisor is the problem. You can report it to Rhonda Stasinski, who's the Director of Human Resources at the diocese. You can report it to the Vicar General. Any one of those would give you an opportunity if you feel uncomfortable going to your supervisor or if your supervisor is the problem. But don't go along with it. Don't keep it under your hat. Please report it immediately. Individuals who engage in prohibited conduct can be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. And it can be termination even for a first act. In other words, depending on the circumstances, if the conduct is sufficiently egregious, it could lead to termination. If someone reports that you've told a dirty joke, are you going to be terminated for it? Probably not one joke. But if you continue to tell dirty jokes or jokes related to other protected statuses, potentially yes, you would be terminated. It's unacceptable behavior. Besides termination, the diocese can take other disciplinary action. You can receive a verbal warning, you can receive a written warning, you can receive a suspension. It just depends on the circumstances involved. And the type of circumstances will depend not only on the type of discipline, but also when it comes to deciding what type of discipline is sufficient to stop the conduct. In other words, if someone complains and they want the individual fired, that doesn't mean the diocese has to fire that individual. It just has to take whatever disciplinary action is necessary to stop the harassing conduct. So we're providing this training so that all employees know what's expected, what constitutes harassment in a hostile work environment, not just being picked on or finding that your boss is rude or demeaning, but to the extent that your boss may be rude or demeaning because of your protected status, that would create a potentially hostile work environment that would violate the Title VII or the Missouri Human Rights Act. I've had situations where people come to me and say, I'm in a hostile work environment because my coworker yells at me. Well, the coworker yelling, if the two of you aren't getting along, that's a management issue. But if the yelling has to do because of your sex or your age or your national origin, that's different. That one is going to potentially create a hostile environment and an illegal environment for you. But just say a personality conflict or difference of opinion that some people view as a hostile environment is not the type of hostile environment that we're discussing here today. The diocese has an anti-harassment policy, which you should have received when you first started with the diocese, and when we make changes also we update it from time to time. We're committed to keeping a workplace free from harassment, and we want a workplace that's comfortable, professional, and where everyone's treated with respect. So if you experience or witness what you believe to be inappropriate conduct that violates the diocesan policy, report it. Even if someone comes to you and says, I want you to know, for instance, that Becky has been giving me a hard time because of my disability, but I don't want you to say anything because I don't want to rock the boat, so please promise me that you will not tell anyone else. You need to let that person know that you're concerned about their environment. You can't not tell someone. For the first reason is that their environment won't change. They won't have a comfortable professional working environment if they have to put up with Becky giving them a hard time about their disability almost on a daily basis. You want to make their environment, you want to improve their environment to make it one that's professional and comfortable for them and for the other people around them. So you need to report it and to take care of the environment, and it should also be reported because if Becky continues to do that, then it can potentially create liability for the diocese and for Becky. So what happens if you witness harassment or it happens to you? First, you can certainly tell the individual that you don't like the conduct, that you find the conduct offensive, and please don't do it again. But the individual is not obligated to do so. Some people feel uncomfortable being that direct. If they feel uncomfortable being direct, and even though sometimes just that kind of directness will stop the conduct, they can go and report it. Report it to the supervisor, report it to the HR director here at the diocese, or report it to the vicar general. And there's no retaliation for a good faith report of any alleged harassment to yourself or to a coworker. When the diocese gets a complaint, it has an obligation to conduct a prompt, a fair, a discreet investigation, and to do it as confidentially as possible. Clearly, they cannot guarantee complete confidentiality because they will need to talk to the person who's alleged to have engaged in the conduct and any witnesses that may have been identified to the conduct to complete their full investigation. And then the diocese is obligated to take action, if any, under the circumstances, if it's founded, to end the inappropriate conduct. And as I had mentioned previously, that can be something such as a verbal warning, a written warning, a suspension, or termination, depending on the circumstances. It may not be what the individual wants to happen, it's what needs to happen to stop the conduct. Again, there's no retaliation for a good faith complaint. However, if someone makes an untrue complaint against someone and it's discovered that the allegations were totally false and really just done to get the individual in trouble and get it investigated, that individual will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. In Missouri, there is individual liability under the Missouri Human Rights Act. And I mention this because under Title VII, it's only the employer, the diocese, who can be liable for discrimination and harassment that violates Title VII or the Missouri Human Rights Act. But in Missouri, under the Missouri Human Rights Act, there's not only the employer liability, but the individual who engages in the conduct can also be legally liable for the inappropriate conduct and named as a separate party in the lawsuit. So, how do you avoid being accused of harassment? As we mentioned, keep physical contact to a minimum and always appropriate. A handshake, a high five, always appropriate. If you engage in other conduct, such as patting someone on the back or giving someone a hug, it can potentially be misconstrued. So you want to keep physical contact to a minimum. Also, keep any sexist comments, conduct, don't engage in any of that. Making any derogatory remarks or jokes or comments about any of the protected statuses should be avoided. And when in doubt, if you've said something that you think may have offended someone, take the time to apologize. A lot of times you can tell from a person's expression or the way they react whether or not they've been offended or didn't like the particular comment. And you can pick up on that and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, and I won't say anything like that again, I apologize. A lot of times it ends it right there. The other thing that you can do is to use a yardstick that I've set up for evaluating inappropriate behavior. In other words, would you make the same comment or engage in the same conduct if your family member was present, or if your boss was present, or if your children were present? If you wouldn't do it with any of those audiences present, don't do it with your coworkers. Also, how would you like to see your comments or conduct in the newspapers? The media covers the docket of cases that are filed, and occasionally, and you may have seen, cases that appear in the newspaper where someone's alleged to have made inappropriate conduct or comments and conduct. And you would not like to see that attached to your name in a public media. So in summary, what I would like for you to take away from this presentation is to know and understand the diocese policy for prohibiting harassment. Beware of your own behavior and those around you. Always be professional and respectful to your coworkers, and they should be professional and respectful to you in kind. If you are having problems with an individual, tell the individual. Feel free to say, please don't make those comments around me. I don't appreciate that. It's not appropriate here. And report any harassment that you believe you are subjected to or that you witness someone being subjected to. Again, if you don't say anything about it, the atmosphere will not improve, and it can potentially create liability for the diocese and the individual engaging in the conduct. And remember, there is no retaliation against an individual who reports or participates in an investigation related to a harassment complaint based on any protected status. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and God bless.